Okay.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. My name is Walter Ray, also known as Bakri Shabazz, and I wrote a book years ago called Coming Clean, Tell Told from the Heart, under the name of Bakri Shabazz. I was dealing with a lot of difficult and personal issues at the time that the book came out, it came out of a process actually of me trying to come to terms with some things that had transpired years before. I realized that I had a degree of competency as it relates to writing when I was in high school, but didn't take the time or give the effort to develop it. In the late 1980s, I began writing what I called poetry and wanted to get into something of a little different nature, short story plays or something else, a full-length book if possible. While grappling with personal issues and praying about them, the idea came to write Coming Clean. Coming Clean was me telling my story. It was an exciting time and a challenging time in my young life. That being said, I couldn't tell my story without including others. We nor I live in a vacuum. If by telling my story, which includes bits and pieces of other stories, if I offended anyone, especially friends and family, I offer my public apology. I was so excited to be able to write what was on my heart and mind that I may not have given enough consideration to the people in my life that helped shape and mold me into what I have become. When I started the project, I didn't know if I could write 100 pages, so that was my first challenge. It went well beyond that. Coming Clean, as I say in the foreword, is not an attempt to glorify violence, drugs, crime, or antisocial behavior on my part. It was not an attempt to make me into something that I was or am not. I hope then, as I do now, that when it is read, a person can see that we are more complicated than just being pigeonholed into stereotypical categories. Some of us do grow and evolve into more than the person we were at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. Change, it is said, is the only thing constant in the universe, so when we don't show some sign of change, we are out of order in the universe. That being said, I'd like to offer to those who didn't get a chance to read the book when it first came out an opportunity to get it now. You can order the book. I'm going to read a couple of chapters of it, short chapters, and talk about it a bit. But you can order the book by sending check or money order for $13 to Walter Ray, P.O. Box 300914, Kansas City, Missouri 64130. Again, that's Walter Ray, P.O. Box 300914, Kansas City, Missouri 64130. The book is $10. There's $3 shipping and handling. If you order more than one book, put the price of the second book plus an extra $1 for shipping and handling. So instead of $3, $4. Now what I'd like to do is just share a little bit of it. Some of you have heard it, some of you have read it, many haven't. And this is called Coming Clean, a Tell Told from the Heart. It's written about my life, things that's happening to me and those around me in the neighborhood between 1967 and 1971. They called me Terry Lee by my first and last name. Excuse me, I was 16 years old and very close to my 17th birthday. Pete was just 16, Pete had just turned 16 2 or 3 months ago. We were kids the night the incident occurred, but kids who felt that they'd been grown for quite some time. I had the feeling that I better move fast like right now because in a couple of months I'd be 17 and they'd take off the kid gloves. At 17 you're considered an adult and they take you to the county jail. No more than 7th floor, nobody in the cell but you stuck. They call your mother, when she comes you're released into her custody. No bond, no strings, you just go. As strange as it may sound, I had a feeling from the beginning that something wasn't right. Pete was from off the block hanging out and ready for action. We were the gruesome twosome. Living in the city, running wild, young bucks are what we called the cats back then. The routine was getting high. We were smoking weed, taking uppers and downers, drinking syrup, and just about anything and everything else we could get our hands on. But at 16 years old, with no jobs and no source of steady income, we had to hustle to make ends meet. We were in the neighborhood with guys our age and older who were mainly in the stick-ups. I mean the for real deal. They were robbing post offices, savings and loans, grocery stores and banks. There were crews doing all kinds of robberies. This was before selling drugs took over and became the main free enterprise system of the ghetto. During this time, if you weren't a real gangster and a killer, you could end up in the grave if you got into that hardcore drug business. Once you started making a lot of money, the gangsters would come through. They set an example by killing you, taking your drugs and money. Pete and I weren't ready for that kind of heavy action. The guys who were involved in the robbery gangs were going to the county jail, then the penitentiary. We'd heard the stories all of our lives about the county. Head busting time, people swinging iron pipes and mop ringers. On top of that, if your butt wasn't tough, it might get taken. Instead of doing the things that got you a ticket straight to the county, I did small things, a little bit of shoplifting, small amounts of drugs, and a few other things. We had a partner by the name of Israel who was about 23 at the time. He and a couple of his partners plotted, planned, and executed a break-in at a pharmacy. They got away with a carload of drugs, mainly phenobarbital. Israel would come riding through the corner stone to the bone. He had phenobarbital and other uppers and downers for days, most of which he was selling, though he did turn Pete and me on for free on a number of occasions. Pete and I were tight with Israel, and what he'd done excited us to no end. We needed to make a score so we could do some of the same things that he was doing. That's what we thought. There was an office building in the neighborhood that wasn't in use at the time. We figured that something had been left inside that we could steal and hopefully make some money from it. The building was a gathering spot for some of the fellows in the neighborhood. On the night of the break-in, as we waited for the moment of entry, it seemed like the whole neighborhood decided to hang out front. Though I never mentioned it to Pete, I had a bad feeling that night. But the decision was made and we were going in come hell or high water. We sat around talking and bullshitting until around midnight when everyone finally left. We went to the back of the building, knocked off the screen, opened the window, and in total darkness climbed in. We hadn't even done enough planning to bring a flashlight. We were smokers, so between the two of us, we did have a butane lighter. To our surprise, the building was empty. There was no radio, TV, desk, telephone, or anything else that we could take to sell and get that money. We'd been inside for less than 5 minutes, looking for something to confiscate when all of a sudden the spotlight hit the window that we just climbed through. We were two teenage boys suddenly faced with impending doom, scared to death. It's the police. Pete ran to the front of the building and I stood in the corner of the empty room with not even a desk to hide behind. But it was black as night. I thought about climbing through that window, spotlight and all, but I wasn't quite sure whether the police were in front or back. I figured they'd call for backup, and if I climbed through that window and guessed wrong and the police were behind that light, they'd open fire, 16 years old or not. I'd heard of too much of that kind of thing happening for me to get the nerve to make that climb. So I stood there in the dark and waited. My wait was short. What seemed like an hour was only 3 or 4 minutes. The next thing I knew, a German Shepherd half my size leaped through that open window. It was search and destroy time. Next came his partner, the police. One white man, a dog, a badge, and a gun. It only took 30 seconds for the pig's flashlight to find me standing straight up in that corner. I was shocked by his next move. When he saw me, he said to the dog, "Get him." Man's best friend, you say? Well, which man? The German Shepherd tried to tear a hole in this young black man. I was 16 years old, under the wrong influences, but I wasn't a bad guy. As the dog attacked, I figured I could keep him at bay with my hat, which I quickly grabbed off the top of my head and put in the dog's face. It was a trick I had picked up from my father, who drove cab and had to fight off the canines himself from time to time. As I attempted to defend myself from the shepherd's fangs, the police started shouting, "Stop hitting the dog. He gonna fuck me up if I don't stop hitting this dog." Excuse my language, but that's what he said, or something to that effect. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor with the dog tearing at my leg. All of a sudden, I spotted a pistol on the floor, within reach. It wasn't mine because I didn't have one. I immediately knew that if I reached for it, it'd be an excuse to kill me. So as soon as I saw the gun, I jumped up off the floor. The entire time that the police were sicking his dog on me, he was asking me, "Who else is in here? Or where's your friend?" I was screaming and hollering at the top of my lungs as this German Shepherd tore at my legs, and between screams, I told him that nobody else was there. After being under attack for about 5 minutes, I was finally led out of what could have been my tomb. In spite of my foolishness, the power of the Lord was with me. As I climbed through the window with my legs bleeding, my pants torn to shreds, and in total shock, I heard Pete scream. That's the first chapter. Now this is chapter number 2, about the same length. Time to think. All I could do was listen as the German Shepherd attacked, ripped clothes, and sank its fangs into Pete. The backup was there as I climbed out the window. I was searched and my hands were cuffed behind my back. I was led into what we called a paddy wagon. I hoped that my own screams and yells would get the attention of some neighborhood soul who would be courageous enough to come and investigate and maybe save a life that could at this moment be taken with one slip of that itchy trigger finger. The shepherd had been on Pete for 2 or 3 minutes, about half the time he'd been let loose on me. Nevertheless, Pete seemed to suffer the greater damage. The shepherd had sunk its fangs into Pete's upper thigh and slashed almost to the waist. He'd also taken a bit of flesh out of Pete's lower leg. Years later, Pete would still show signs of that fateful night, carrying large kilo scars on the 2 places where the beast did the most damage. The power and presence of the Lord can be with the least of these, even though they, as well as others, may not recognize it. Looking back at that night and other difficult days and nights to come in my still short life, I bow down and give all praises to Allah for rescuing me from difficulty. The hateful, inhumane, Ku Klux Klan acting like dislike anything that ain't white, food policemen unleashed the fury of the beast on me that night. My clothes, especially my pants, were all but torn to shreds. The shepherd had caused blood to flow through the tears and rips and holes, but after a week or so, my body was completely healed. There were no visible scars, none on the outside, that is. By the time Pete was laid out, handcuffed, and damn near thrown into the back of the paddy wagon, we were both in a state of shock. I was running off at the mouth saying, "Don't say anything," because the MS probably has speakers, and I'm listening. The fool KKK backup policeman was driving the paddy wagon. I was 16 years old, but I've been in police cars and paddy wagons a number of times before. I'd had some fairly rough rides, and I'd heard about others, but this fool took the case. This fool drove so fast it felt like the wagon was on two wheels when he turned corners. We had to stiffen our legs and press our backs up against the wall of the wagon to avoid being thrown around like Raggedy Ann. Then the fool would run up on a stoplight or a stop sign or just slam on the brakes. There we were, handcuffed, bleeding, traumatized, and shocked, and this dumb MF was driving like a bat out of hell. Had it not been so pitiful, it would have been funny. The Klansman drove like he owned the streets. It was after 1 a.m. by the time we arrived at General Hospital. The rednecks must have been on the radio talking to one another as we were being brought in. When we arrived and were let out of the wagon and into the hospital, 6 or 7 of their buddies, rednecks, police friends, co-workers, KKK, or whatever, or however they refer to themselves, were standing around like they were there to congratulate these fools and make jokes all night at our expense. Jokes like, "What dogs did you get them with?" Or, "Man, you should have taken the Dobermans instead of the fucking shepherd, ha ha, he he." The redneck policeman responded, "What I told you, I was gonna find somebody to put these dogs on tonight. Believe it," that's what he said, or something like that. By 2 a.m., police were everywhere. Our hands were cuffed behind our backs and our legs were shackled as if we were going to run, as if we were the dangerous ones. All we could do was sit there, bleeding, shackled, handcuffed, and angry, and waiting to get our tetanus shots. Had I reached for the pistol that the first Klansman slipped out on the floor, somebody would have needed much more than a tetanus shot. As we sat on that bench waiting, wondering, and watching, a partner of ours by the name of Derek, who was about 17 years old, was led in by another set of officers. His presence there seemed to revolve around a domestic dispute with a female. Derek looked at Pete and me and asked us if we were okay. We must have looked pretty bad because when we later saw him on the street, he said, "From the way you look, I thought you'd been shot." After we got our tetanus shots, we were transported to the Jackson County Courthouse in downtown Kansas City, where the county jail is located. On the elevator ride up, we passed the 7th floor, where from past experiences I knew we should be headed. The 7th floor is where they had real jail cells, but it was the floor designated for juveniles. The upper floors, beginning with the 11th, is where the real county began. The elevator stopped on the 14th floor. As doors opened and we stepped out into the hall, we noticed bars designating the area where the adult offenders were held. As the police led us towards the bars, they took guns from holsters and slid them through an opening, then suddenly realized that these were juveniles and belonged on the 7th floor, not up here with a dogfight we just survived. Could have been just the beginning of our troubles. The Jackson County Jail was notorious in 1971. The blacks were a family of brothers who lived in the neighborhood just off 39th Street. At this time, Tyrone was my age, 16, Ricky was 17, Gerald was 18 or 19, and Prince, the oldest, was about 23. The blacks, along with a number of other associates and partners who called 39th Street home, were responsible for a good percentage of major crimes in Kansas City at that time. Some were involved with drugs, but the main thing around 39th Street was armed robberies. They were doing all kinds of robberies. Everything that wasn't nailed down, they were taking. Years later, Gerald Black would tell me that when he went to the federal penitentiary for bank robbery in 1971, he said that his stay in the Jackson County Jail was rougher than the penitentiary. So you can imagine the relief that Pete and I felt while turning around and stepping back into that elevator for the ride down to the 7th floor, where the level of danger couldn't be quite so high. Pete and I were put in separate cells, iron bars and a steel bunk. No mattress, no pillow, no blanket, just steel. I looked out the 7th floor window from my cell to the street below, wondering who would come and get me this time. The streets were empty. I'd been here before, and it seemed to help have gotten here quicker. I began to wonder whether it would be my mother or my father who would come and get me this time. My mother especially was constantly worried about my staying in the streets all times of the day and night. I remember the time my older brother went to jail the first time. He was just 15 years old. The call came from the police station. "We have your son in custody for car theft," the officer told my mother. Back then we called it joyriding. Steal a car, drive it all over town, park it, and maybe go back and get it the next day like you owned it. That was the first of too many trips my parents would have to make to the jail to claim one of their sons. On that first occasion, they had for some reason decided to leave Maxwell in the custody of KC's finest overnight. I suppose they meant to teach him a much needed lesson. I was only 11 or 12 years old at the time, and I remember feeling ashamed of having to go with my family the next morning to retrieve my older brother from jail, a criminal. That was beyond my understanding at that point. That's about the time that my life started to speed up and things started changing quickly. As I sat in that jail cell alone waiting for help to arrive, my mind began to go back through the past few years. I sat there trying to put order to my life and trying to figure out how in the hell I ended up in an empty building in the middle of the night being attacked by the police and his dog. So it's Coming Clean, a telltale from the heart. I think it's an interesting book. The next chapter is about Dr. King's assassination and the response we had in Kansas City, Missouri, how the riot started. Everything is from my memory and perspective. Some may disagree with the details, but from what I can remember, this is what I wrote about. My life, the events in the city, stress between different neighborhoods and cliques and groups, fights and competition between schools, and not to glorify or anything, but the things that are happening in today's environment with the young people is traced all the way back to what we were doing, and then before us, it was traced back to the groups before us, those who are misguided. Hopefully you can get some understanding about people from reading the book, and get a little bit of Kansas City history too. So this is the book, Coming Clean, A Telltale from the Heart by Bakri Shabazz, which is me, Walter Ray. And you can get a copy by ordering it. Send me a check of money on it for $13 for one book. Walter Ray, P.O. Box 300914, Kansas City, Missouri, 64128. I have done other writings since then. This is my book I wrote in Ghana, which I'll do another video on, African Guide to Success in America. I've got another manuscript that's complete, and some other things I'd like to share with the public, and hopefully find some publishers and agents and all that good literary stuff. So God bless, Hotep, Assalamu alaikum, have a wonderful day, and till next time, peace. You can turn it off, sir.